Hello again, Professor Robert Beshara. Thank you for joining me. I proposed when I invited you originally for this second conversation, I was very curious to hear from you regarding your article on the critique of postcolonial unreason. And maybe we can spend some time on that, but we can wander around it and explore other topics. Okay, so Robert K. Beshara is the author of the following works: Decolonial Psychoanalysis Towards Critical Islamophobia Studies, Freud and Said, Contrapuntal Psychoanalysis as Liberation Praxis, Psychoanalytic Biography of Ye, The Legacy of Unconditional Love, Transmodern Cinema and Decolonial Film Theory, a study of Youssef Chahine's al-Masir, and on a more artistic, I would say critical artistic side, you have also published reviews, essays on cinema, Singularity, a book of poems for the most part, which I have a hard copy of here, and even more recently, drafts on finished screenplays, which is I also have it in my hand as a hard copy. You have also edited two volumes so far, A Critical Introduction to Psychology and a Critical Psychology Praxis. I'm sure I've missed something there, but from what I've missed, I'd like to mention your music. So maybe you can add to my introduction by saying a little bit about your musical career.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Davood, for the invitation. I'm happy to be back on the podcast and hi to your listeners and viewers. I'm also wearing this special shirt for you, Jacques Derrida,
Oh,
as you can see.
the pipe, right?
Yeah, you can see the pipe, right?
Yeah, cool. Very nice.
And it has his signature at the bottom too. So the funny thing is most people when they look at it in the US, they think it's Hugh Hefner.
Right.
Or what's that detective?
I think I remember.
Columbo, Columbo.
Yes, Colombo. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so people think it's Columbo or Hugh Hefner.
Oh,
No
cool.
one no one can really guess who he is. So it's always exciting when I'm like, oh, it's Jacques Derrida, French philosopher. So
Yeah,
now they're gonna be like, okay, I need to look this up.
nice.
But yeah, music. I've been making music for 25 years. I really started releasing music since the year 2000. So it's something that's been really consistent throughout my life. It's probably my number one passion. In a sense, I feel I agree with Nietzsche. I was actually looking at some of his comments in The Birth of Tragedy yesterday on the universality of music as a language and how primary it is in comparison to, let's say, human language. And for him, music is the ultimate universal language. It's like it's more foundational than uh, language that we use that uses words. And there is truth to that because with words, words can be twisted and misinterpreted, and we've seen that happen a lot with different kind of ideological interpretations of texts and things like that, especially holy texts. But with music, you've never seen anyone. I mean, there will have to be really rare cases of people who decide to kill someone else based on listening to music. I guess it is possible, but um, there's something about music that captures, I think, spirit, and I always feel like I'm channeling something transcendent, but also it's a very intellectual activity that feels mathematical because I do engage a lot with musical theory and I've studied music as well. So, but it's hard to talk about and it's always better to listen to.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things I enjoy the most, composing music, recording music, and yeah, I've started really since I was really young, probably when I was 6 years old, playing the keyboard, and I haven't really stopped since then. And I learned pretty much like the guitar, the drums, and just like I was so curious about music and passionate that I you know, um, explored almost every genre.
Are there aspects of you that come out only in music? For example, when I listen to some of your tracks, I detect something that I don't see as much in your writing, especially in your academic writing, which is a sense of humor. I remember even
Yeah.
in the lyrics, there's a in one of your songs. I'm probably not going to be accurate, but the lyrics uh, say, "I." They describe the experience of eating three pieces of fish, uh, and
Oh
then
yeah. Fried
surrendering
fish. Yeah.
to fried fish, and then surrendering
Yeah.
to la siesta. And I was like, it
Yeah.
was funny. It made me laugh. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was wondering if there's these media. Every media has, you know, spaces for expressing different things and expressing differently. But I'm curious if you find certain sides of you being having
Yeah.
this, especially in
I
music.
I would say it's probably the most authentic side of myself is expressed through music.
Mhm,
Like with the writings, it's kind of always limited in a way because like there's the academic writings and then the creative writings, and the creative ones are closer to music, but still music transcend those writings in a way that really captures I would say the singularity of my being. There's no other way of I can put it. And it's something that transcends ego because like sometimes people think when you talk about your music that it's coming from an ego place, but I really do surrender myself to something that's bigger, that's why I think in terms of singularity of being that something that's larger than ego that obviously involves the unconscious as well. So there's definitely much more. Even that song that you mentioned, it involves a nightmare that takes place after eating fried fish, and so
mhm.
it explores that kind of um, surreal nightmare. So there's it actually ties back to to surrealism and psychoanalysis. When we talked last time, I mentioned how I got into psychoanalysis through surrealism. And this is very much true because I was, an artist before I was a scholar. And so through cinema, through paintings, poetry, and music for sure, I was able to sort of encounter the surreal dimension of the unconscious and see if I can experience it, but also capture it and express it in my work. And
Mhm,
that's mm, harder to do in writing because in writing you kind of point to it and you're talking about it as opposed to having a direct experience, which I
mhm,
feel music comes very, very close to that.
mhm, mhm. That being embodying a singularity without being having it as an egotistical project is also, I think, embodied in this collection. Especially, I saw there's a chapter here called the spiritual. So
Yeah.
the chapters are divided based on the topics emotional, spiritual, like from the beginning, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, and miscellaneous.
Mm,
The spiritual one, you have a brief poem: one God, one world, one Adam,
mm,
one Eve, one love, one life, only one. One is a number, an odd number. Odd. I like that double meaning of an odd number, my lucky number, the number of unity. Join me and let's be one. So join me. It's not just about me. It's not about me.
right.
Well, it's about more than that. Even
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's actually the inspiration behind the title, really. So you kind of, in a way, honed in on if you think in terms of like, uh, what do you call it? Like a hologram. You know how a hologram has like reflections of everything within like tiny, tiny spaces. So in a way, this little poem is a microcosm of the whole. It contained within it, kind of like a fractal, right? Like you zoom in, you keep seeing the same pattern repeating infinitely. And so it's funny that you captured that one. I was willing to actually read to you from the book as well if you want that at some point.
yeah, sounds
Because I
good.
think, yeah.
Sounds
So,
great. We can maybe do that now because we might not
okay.
return to
Since
this later.
we're
Yeah.
on Singularity, which is basically a book of poems that I wrote in Cairo, Egypt, where I'm from, between 2004 and 2008. They've been like you know shelved on a hard drive. I have so many hard drives. I'm kind of obsessed with archiving. If you talk to my wife, I probably have like 20 hard drives of material. So I'm always kind of opening the hard drives and deciding what I want to release, what I want to work on, what I want to edit.
Hmm.
So this has been like something that's going on for a long time, and eventually
Yeah.
it came out.
Would you say that by archiving, you keep the possibility of archaeology of your own life alive? Because without archives, there won't. It will be much harder to do archaeology and genealogy. So you keep that as a potential.
Yeah, I think the way I kind of think about it, I like the metaphor that it's like time travel.
Hmm. Hmm.
So these are poems that I wrote when I was younger, and they're like messages in a bottle sent to myself in the future. And that, I get to receive it in the future and look at it and decide from the future's perspective, which is now the present,
Hmm.
what is relevant for me, sometimes I disagree with things, but I'm like, okay, I want to honor this younger Robert who wrote this and had this experience. So it's kind of a complicated process, but I try to stay true to the experience, even if it has changed.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So I want to read to you from actually the spiritual section.
Hmm.
There's a poem called The Wisdom of Breath, which I really like. Born, created, nude, instinctive, memories, emotions, and whoever you are. Resting on your back, relaxing all your muscles, freeing all your nerves. Genuinely, you start listening to your city, letting go through, resisting our fear of the unknown, coming in touch with that higher self of ours, taming our ego to get rid of the blindness, gazing at the little stars that light up our ceiling, remembering a long gone innocence when we follow the light, focusing on the shiniest star. We witness a spark, a glimpse of the truth. Gradually, we start observing the auras around us, surpassing our own logic, beyond the known, and into the mystery. We're hypnotized. Full potential, feeling divine, we become the source, a channel of life, a magnetic field of human consciousness, encompassing infinity and uniting existence. We float up above our bodies, and our mind is clear now. We're in touch with the soul, and we can feel whole. Avoiding distractions, keeping our focus on oneness, we slip and slip into the beautiful unknown, and we float up some more, light as ether, yet we feel the energy. It starts with a breath, and it ends with a breath, and the cycle goes on through the wisdom of breath.
Hmm. Thank you.
So that gives people a taste of some
Hmm.
of the material in this book.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Do you remember the when you does that poem itself help you go back and retrieve the experience around it?
You know what? Yeah, I think part of it too. Um, Part of the time travel aspect. Sometimes it's not remembering the experience itself, but
Hmm.
remembering when I read this poem to someone somewhere and how they responded to it. And I remember that. So this is a good example of that where I took it to class. It was I think it was history of theater class because I was a theater major for my undergrad. And I was reading it to fellow students in the class, and the reaction was like, wow. And that's my memory. More like I like that it had this effect.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I remember that much more than the experience of writing the poem itself.
I also wanted to ask you about the cover design.
Oh yeah.
This is the front and this is the back. On the back, it's more clearly a cut. Uh, and is singularity a cut? And if so, am I maybe misperceiving it?
Yeah, so first of all, the design is by my wife, Connie, so I want to give her credit. I did give her the idea, but she's the one that worked on it.
Nice.
Um, so on the front cover, what you see in the center is actually the number one in Arabic.
Oh, yes.
So funnily enough, as you know, when we use numbers in the Western world, they're actually Arabic numerals, and the numbers that we use in the Arab world are Indian numerals.
Mm.
So even though I'm saying this is one in Arabic, it's technically Indian, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
So you have it's like one. Um, And there's a spiral kind of like a mandala. There's like a sort of infinity. All these words come from poems jumbled together, and
Mhm.
they're sort of as they're spiraling into infinity, they lose their wordness and they become like vibrations or colors. And that's what you see the completion of that process on the other end. So it's
Oh,
almost like looking at the spiral from outside or inside.
I see, I see, I see. Okay, okay,
So
great.
something about the relationship between words and experiences and feelings and things like that.
Okay, great, great. Okay, now how about if you could, I mean, I know this is also a work of archival work,
Yes.
your draft. Unfinished, and the un part of the unfinished is in parentheses, meaning that
Yes.
some are finished, some are unfinished.
Exactly.
Uh, is there a story? And when I read the introduction, I felt like you almost didn't want to. There was a part of you that didn't want to publish this collection. Is that true, or
Um,
I read too much into the?
um, well,
Were you
yeah,
hesitant?
I think the hesitancy comes from whether I'm going to complete projects or not. And that's why uh, saying in the subtitle that it's unfinished and calling it drafts, that's how I can be at peace with this project. So some of the screenplays included in this book, I already made into films,
Hmm.
whether short films or feature films. Some of them are like one act, um, not the complete screenplay. Like Psyche is a good example of that. That's like a one act, but it could have two more acts, so it's incomplete. Um, some of them are really in draft format, like the last one, which is called Zaman Ma'danika. And some of them I wanted to produce as films, like Oedipus Kingsley. And we did a virtual reading for that one, but I never was able to do it. So yeah, it tries to kind of capture that spectrum of realized projects and unrealized projects. But the other important point, and I think I do talk about that, is the reason they're also drafts is because the final editing process is really the editing of the film. So that's when you're actually rewriting it the last time.
That's right.
So whatever script, even let's say Alchemy in Hyde Park, which is my second feature film, I made that film. It just won an award actually in Venice. I think like best experimental film or something like that. For that one, the actual film, if you compare it to the screenplay, is very different.
Mm,
And so you have the shooting script, which is the version included here, but the actual screenplay as it appears in the film is edited by me when I'm editing and removing scenes and editing around things. So I think there's always, when you're writing, there's always it's always more. And when you're editing, you're reducing it to what's essential. And
mm,
so, and that's why I consider them drafts in that sense, and is that they're not actually, but how do you really, I would have to transcribe the film in order to have the finished version. But then I wanted to include also the screenplays that were not made into films. So that was kind of the logic behind that.
mhm, mhm. Makes sense. Is there a possibility that some of the drafts will turn like the narrative structure might change in the process of production? Like I'm thinking it's a bad example, but the
Yeah.
Great Expectations having two endings. One
Yeah,
is a relatively happier ending, one is, but we end up with.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Alchemy in Hyde Park is a great example. The script as it is included is longer. It has an ending. So it's about these four characters. Um, they kind of represent the classical Greek elements. So it's called Alchemy in Hyde Park because it's the alchemy between these elements. It has a kind of an esoteric aspect to it. They all live in the same neighborhood, which is Hyde Park in Chicago, Illinois. And Chicago is kind of the fifth hidden character of the film. I always thought of it this way. So I'm always very sensitive to architecture and design, and that's really captured in the film. But it's about, the tension between the four characters and their relationships. And what was interesting about that film is that I didn't want to have one protagonist, but four, which makes it a much more complex structure. That the four are equally um, important in the narrative structure.
Mm.
So there's not one that you follow as the protagonist. You have really four protagonists. And as it was written, it was longer, and there's kind of like an ending where they sit together indoors in someone's apartment, and there's like a tarot reading and this kind of resolution. And then, you know, that stayed the ending of the film for a number of years. And of course, what really helps with editing and rewriting is when you show it in front of an audience. You get feedback and you also feel the energy in the room, which I really enjoy that. And so after screening it multiple times in different cities, I decided to cut the ending, make it shorter, and cut it in a much more ambiguous way where there is no resolution.
Mm.
So instead of having like a scene that resolves everything and having all the characters together, I actually ended on two characters. You don't know if they're going to end up together or not. There's no resolution. Movie ends. So much more ambiguous ending, and I actually like it that way more. So it's better than how it was written, and that's why it's a draft.
Mhm, mhm. Nice. Okay. So if you don't mind, let's maybe slowly get into the critique. So
Yeah,
I was really looking forward to speaking with you, but of course we can switch topics midway.
yeah,
Before getting into that, I'm also curious about, like, let me ask you this: Do you yourself, what is your relationship with popular culture? I mean, this video will be posted on YouTube.
yeah,
Do you watch YouTube sometimes? I know you're on X, formerly Twitter. But
yeah.
you're like, how do you relate to, like, what is your relationship with cultural material? Do you like consume
Um,
popular culture, consume or engage with?
uh, yeah. I mean, I do have my limits. So there are things that are extremely mainstream that I'm not into. Let's say Sabrina Carpenter or something like that. I'm not trying
Mhm.
to offend anyone, but like I'm not interested in whatever is the latest fashion or whatever is the latest trend in music. That's not what appeals to me. What appeals to me if something is aesthetically engaging for me, regardless whether it was made today or 100 years ago or whatever, I'll definitely spend time on YouTube obsessing over that. Um, you know, um, so
Do you think?
so I don't know if it's
Yeah,
popular culture because that does include high culture as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you find it? I find it relative to maybe 20, 10, 15 years ago. I find it harder to find things
Mm,
online because we have so much. And
yeah,
we have a subset of things that have become very good at capturing our attention.
yeah,
So I find it hard to find, like, the joyful rabbit holes that we get into. Like, oh, I just find a musician or a thinker. Let me just find as much as possible about them.
yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm like an obsessive completist. So if I find something that I like, I want to know everything that I can know about that thing and like experience it to the fullest. But now I'm gonna respond to you not as a consumer, as an artist. Because even individuals who are interested, I mean, the part of actually maybe I can read part of Draft's preface here because it actually relates to this point.
Mhm.
Um, I do have a problem with categorical thinking and the way the media is structured around categories. So they can be called search engine optimization. They could be called keywords. It's all how algorithms are structured. It's usually boils down to one word, one category, one signifier. And it's like how to capture a lot under that. So the problem that I have is that instead of people being curious and trying to find something that is not categorizable, they're always trying to, first of all, identify what categories they like in order to fit things within that. And that's not how I approach the world. Of course, it's a useful way. I think you have a background in cognitive psychology, right? So cognitive psychology is all about categorical thinking. So let me read this and then we'll talk more about it. But
Sure.
as an artist, I'm not happy with the way the algorithm is set up. Spotify is obviously not equitable for artists. As an independent artist, I wish people were more curious about the kind of singular vision that I um, release into the world that's completely controlled by one person and not a committee or a record label. Um, and instead, they trust more. I think more people trust whatever is on Spotify that's trending. And that even comes from people who are critical thinker and who might be Marxists or whatever. So I'm challenging folks to actually listen outside of their comfort zone. So I say in the preface here, I do not know how to share this trajectory of my life with others without coming across as if I'm bragging or making things up. One of my struggles in the US is that people here are so accustomed to categorical thinking that they may have difficulty understanding my experience. For example, I'm supposed to be a psychologist or a filmmaker, a composer or a writer, etc. I cannot be all of these things at once, and even if I choose one of these professional categories, I still have to specify my subcategories of identification. For instance, I have to determine what genres of music I produce, what styles of writing and directing inform my cinematic aesthetics, or what subfields of psychology I subscribe to ideologically. My mind does not work that way. I have a general fidelity for art, science, and spirituality. I'm curious about many things, and I pursue my passions with creativity and rigor. When I write music, I try to capture what I'm thinking and or how I am feeling. I do not think in terms of a genre mold in which I can fit my musical idea or expression. This applies to everything else that I do. I know it can make me come across as seemingly incoherent, but I cannot help but be who I am and do what I enjoy. I understand the function of categories. They cognitively simplify a complex world. However, I am a complex subject who enjoys complexity. So, for example, I play music where I'm living here. I
Mhm.
do live shows and the thing that I always get when I play something is people come to me and they ask me, how would you classify this? Is it this genre or that genre? Why not just listen to the music and really let go and actually experience something? Because that's really how I do it. I don't think, okay, I want to produce a reggae track and therefore I'm going to do this kind of format and it doesn't work that way. And that's saying that it's not, I'm not saying be random because I'm not random in my approach. As I told you, there's a intuition, there's a sort of openness to the unknown, to something greater than myself, but there's also a lot of hard thinking and work that goes into it and a lot of music theory. So it's not random, but it's so hard. I don't know why listening is so hard. And actually, there's maybe a psychoanalytic lesson here about the difficulty of listening and the inability of listening, right?
Mhm.
And obviously, I struggle with that as an artist because people are more interested to know how it's classified in order so they can make sense of it, as opposed to being curious and going into something that's produced by one person with their vision,
Mhm.
and getting lost in that world.
Mhm. Yeah, what you said reminds me of something that movie critics sometimes do, and they they sometimes object to a film because it fails to produce or to bring out characters as opposed to types. A type is a kind of creature, created uh, personality that is basically completely exhausted by the category. But a character is more than that. A character is complex and it's not reducible to the types that could potentially describe it. And what you're describing is the artist themselves is a character, not a type. And we have this
Yes.
very strong urge to ask about what type of artist is this that we are dealing with. And then once we have that, once we have the type, then we feel good. We feel it's kind of an accomplishment.
And part of it is attention span and boredom because there's so much oversaturation. Um, you know, people don't even give something a chance. And so, Cryptic Reflections, my first feature film, which actually um, uh, it stars Esser Yassin, who's a huge star in Egypt now. That was his first big film. If you look him up, he's almost like a Hollywood level star now. Um, that film is about someone struggling with depression after losing their parents. Okay. And at some point in their life, they had this dream of becoming a rock star, and they think that their wish to become a rock star somehow caused their parents to die.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so they feel some kind of guilt in the grieving process. So really a film that deals with psychology, at a very deep level, and obviously the unconscious and all that. Um, Again, for a lot of people, some people love it. I mean, I have friends that are like, this is a masterpiece. It's great. So there are these reactions, but you also have the reactions that this is boring. Nothing is happening. But like, how else do you capture depression? Depression is boring.
Hmm.
Like I'm trying to capture that experience of someone who like doesn't want to get up from bed
Hmm.
and like their relationship to time. So it's also like it's almost there's a lack of compassion for this diversity of experience that humans have,
Hmm.
which are not reducible to categories.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And this we can say slow art or complex art. I mean, if you think about Tarkovsky as a good example, his films are very slow, and he wrote a book called Sculpting in Time. So he's very intentional about how he's using time to explore subjectivity in his work, right? And if we don't have patience, it goes back to listening. Um, and I think about again, what is the analytic position? Uh, it's obviously going to be boring to listen to someone complaining about themselves the same way all the time, but you're not supposed to be distracted by that. You're supposed to try to listen to the unconscious of their speech, right? And it's the same thing when I feel that when I'm making art, is I think people respond to some surface level thing in whatever thing is produced, which has to do with the level of the category, because it's a very superficial level of oversimplifying everything. Whereas the experience itself is much more interesting and complex if you let go of the category and you surrender to the experience.
Hmm. I find that very interesting that especially in relating to an artist, we are listening to their unconscious, that we are relating to something they cannot fully, if they were to talk about it, they may not be able to fully articulate it at a conscious level, but they are conveying it in their art. And if we listen carefully, we will get more than what they consciously intended to tell us or to show us.
And there's enjoyment in that. That's my argument, is if you let go and you actually have the patience to listen, because a lot of times there's a lot of skipping that happens. I get all the statistics for the streaming stuff. I can show it to you if you're interested, but basically, there's a large group of people that skip in less than 10 seconds. So how can you even judge, let's say, a composition that's 5 minutes long in 10 seconds?
Yeah.
Like that's so unrealistic. But
Yeah.
that's also, you could apply this to anything, like a book. They say don't judge a book by its cover. Uh, I have an experience that I shared on X recently. Do you know this group called Freud Intensifies?
No.
It's a very popular group on social media.
Hmm.
And at some point, they shared the cover for my book, Decolonial Psychoanalysis. So
Hmm.
this is a group, let's say they have 100,000 followers or more. So
Hmm.
big reach. So I was like, curious, wow, they share this, on their own. Then I look at the comments, and these are coming from mostly European psychoanalysts or psychologists. There's no relationship between psychology or psychoanalysis and Islam. This is nonsense. What is this? And all the reaction, I kept going through the comments. All the reactions are to the cover of the book and to the title of the book. There's
Hmm.
no interest at all in my ideas, my theories, all the methodological work that I did, the years of putting this book together. It's extremely superficial and reductive. And you can apply this to many, many things, but this is quite a prominent phenomenon. I don't know if it always existed, but definitely there's something about the internet that makes it worse, and it goes back to your question. I think there's an oversaturation of things, and there's no sense of really spending time. It's almost like a skipping consciousness, if I would, and a super reductive categorical consciousness. It's a very superficial way of being, in my opinion.
Hmm. 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 And it provides the background for the kinds of problems that we will be turning to now,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wokeism and anti-wokeism, which
yeah.
before what I find this was a very helpful essay that you've written, an article, um, with lots of citations and lots of like careful thought. It's a genealogy of the left in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's a very timely critique, and it brings you bring a set of tools to help us think clearly about these issues surrounding wokeness, wokeism, that distinction, culture
Yeah.
wars, cancel culture, the difference between criticism and critique, the difference between colonialism and coloniality, and and the other
Hmm.
decolonial and anti-colonialism and decoloniality. And so maybe we can, I don't know how to begin. This is what is the
Begin at the beginning. I think
yeah
that's always
yeah.
right.
So maybe with the
Uh,
title, uh,
well,
maybe
before the title, I want to talk about what inspired the article,
great.
right? And actually, related to what we were talking about earlier, a lot of people are afraid to even read this article because of what it deals with. So there's a lot of assumptions. And that's the thing, the exact thing that I'm critiquing is the fact that things are reduced in a kind of binary way. So it's reduced to wokeness versus anti-wokeness. And what I'm trying to say is that that's not really correct. That's not, I don't have a problem with wokeness. In fact, I champion wokeness in the essay, and we can talk about what that means.
Mhm,
My problem is with anti-wokeness and wokeism. And I talk about wokeism as a liberal ideology and basically anti-wokeness as basically a conservative ideology. Um, there's a conflation between wokeism and wokeness that's coming from the right. And so, because I wrote this article, there's an assumption that somehow I'm sympathetic to the right perspective, right? And I'm not. And again, there's this lack of engagement with nuance and complexity, which is what I am for, is to show how these things are different and what should we be arguing for, what should we be arguing against, and why, in a very reasoned way, right?
mhm,
Um, now, the background behind it, as you know, it does have a lot of personal experiences that are in there
mhm,
because, you kind of have to write about what you know. But it took me a long time to sort of digest those experiences and reflect on them and then turn them into something that, in the form of arguments, in the form of this essay. So
mhm,
that was kind of difficult because I didn't want to write this quickly. Like, this is something I've been thinking about for at least maybe 3, 4 years or more. But I wanted to write it um, when I'm not feeling a lot of emotions. So, and because it is a critique also of effective politics, so I can't write from that perspective, um, which is basically this idea of like vibes, that you look at something, you get a certain vibe from it, and you have a quick judgment, and then you respond to it on that basis. And that's how everything is reduced in a binary position. Either you're for this or anti this, and it's extremely simplistic and polarizing, and a lot of nuance is lost in the process. To go back in time a little bit, I'll give an example from an earlier experience that I actually talk about here, about how I kind of deal with these experiences. So I used to, when I was working on Islamophobia as my sort of doctoral dissertation topic, that's something I was working on for a long time. And I used to go to University of California in Berkeley to present my work at this conference on Islamophobia. I went there 4 times. I knew the conference organizer, Hatem Bazian, good friend of mine. He was also on my committee, and an amazing Palestinian scholar, someone that people should look into. And I really enjoyed presenting at the conference. However, one time, in the context of, I think it was kind of beginning of like the cancellation of Zizek, he presented at the Left Forum um, a number of years ago in New York. And there was a group of radicals who tried to deplatform him.
Mhm.
They had leaflets with quotes from him out of context saying that he's a racist and he's a misogynist, he's this and that, and therefore he should be deplatformed or canceled and he shouldn't be allowed to be a keynote speaker. Ultimately, they didn't succeed, and his talk is actually on YouTube and everyone can watch it. And so at the Islamophobia conference, I was presenting an argument for Islamophobia as a fundamental fantasy using Zizek's analysis of anti-Semitism in The Plague of Fantasies, which I think is a wonderful analysis from his earlier work. My problem with him is that he doesn't have this analysis when it comes to Islamophobia. So he has a really good analysis, theoretical analysis of anti-Semitism, how it's like a phantasmatic structure within ideology. But when it comes to Islamophobia, his writings are really sloppy.
Mhm.
So anyways, when I presented that paper, a member of the audience was very upset with me that I cited Zizek. So there was no argument specific to what I was saying. It's just the name Zizek, the signifier Zizek, was triggering effectively, and the person was upset. And basically, they're telling me I shouldn't cite Zizek or that's not allowed, right? So when I go ahead.
Sorry, just to interject here, and they were performing. It's important that they felt the urge to perform that upset. So,
Yeah, so they're physical, yeah, they're visibly upset, but again, what you would expect in a conference is at least some kind of counter argument or critique, not just that you're upset with me that I cited Zizek.
mhm, mhm,
I don't know if that's enough for an academic conference. But at the same time, out of respect for this individual, I wasn't sure how to respond because honestly, I do get a little bit confused when someone has such a strong emotional reaction when my work is like critiquing Islamophobia and actually doing good work. So I get confused a little bit that they focus on something like that and that becomes like a contention.
mhm,
So I didn't know how to respond. So usually that's my method is not to respond to something like that and think about it. Okay. So I thought about it and I responded with a paper.
mhm,
That paper I ended up presenting at the University of Manchester at a conference on Psychoanalytic Islam and Islamic Psychoanalysis, which is a book published by Routledge, co-edited by Ian Parker and Sabah Siddiqui. So that chapter, it's called Decolonizing Psychoanalysis, Psychoanalyzing Islamophobia. And this was basically my response. I can't just respond to an emotional reaction with an emotion because that doesn't make sense to me. I have to think about what is this emotional reaction about? It's basically some kind of argument about Zizek being a racist and therefore I shouldn't cite him. So then I had to kind of think about that. What I concluded was that back then, at least, maybe my position could differ today, but talking back in 2017, I argued that Zizek was not a racist or an Islamophobe, but that his theorization of Islamophobia is sloppy or under-theorized. And so that was kind of my critique, is that that is the problem that I have with him, is that he doesn't have a strong theory of Islamophobia. So what I'm doing is I'm extending Zizek's analysis beyond Zizek himself.
mhm,
And in that sense, I'm critiquing him. I think this is the appropriate way to deal with, something like a situation like this, as opposed to this idea of having an emotional reaction and canceling the individual.
mhm,
So this is one example. Now that project ended up being my first book, Decolonial Psychoanalysis. So Decolonial Psychoanalysis really came as a response to, in a way, that individual. I mean, I was doing that research for a while, but I had to think about what it means to decolonize. Now, for many people, it doesn't mean the same thing that it means for me. For many people, it's kind of like an emotional thing um, that has to do, again, with cancellation. So I'll give you another example because I think the best way to talk about it is think about it concretely, right?
mhm,
The other example that I use in the essay is that I was invited to a West Coast private university to teach a course on social psychoanalysis, and this is a course for graduate students and master's and PhD. So I put together a syllabus that's really, really inclusive. So it starts with Freud, Fromm, Marcuse, sort of to cover the foundation of psychoanalysis and Marxist critiques. But then I move into questions of race and racism, as well as considering the trans issue and feminist perspective. So it's really covering psychoanalysis from a lot of angles, right?
Mhm.
But the students, the situation, the specific situation that happened was one student in the class. Now, I talk about I do have scoliosis and degenerative disc disease, and that time when I went to the university when I was traveling, I had a really bad back pain. Like sometimes I wasn't able to get up from the chair. Yeah, so it was so bad that I was really miserable. But I went all the way because I was committed to the students and to teaching the class. And
Mhm.
it's an intensive class where basically we would meet 3 times, and each time you meet for the whole day, like 8 hours. So it's a very intensive experience. So I go there, and one student starts crying in the class within the first 10 minutes. So again,
Similar.
that's transference, right? And I do have a problem with blurring the line between, let's say, the clinic and the classroom, or psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, and education.
Mhm.
I really am against that. And I've seen people, psychoanalysts in my graduate program, who try to conduct the class as if it's group therapy. And I hate these kind of blurring of boundaries. I think actually it's very unethical, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So I had no idea that the students expected this to be some kind of group analysis where they're, you know, I'm gonna be there to receive all this transference, and like we have to do some, I'm just going to teach a class in a regular way. I had no idea. And so this student starts crying. That student did not do the readings. So
Mhm.
obviously there is guilt, okay? But the argument that they made for why they're crying is that they thought that Freud is poison, or all these readings are poison for their body, and they don't want to ingest this poison. So they're using this metaphor to justify anti-intellectualism or ignorance. I mean, how else can I put it?
Yeah.
I'm still committed to a tradition of reading things and critiquing them, which is what you're doing in this podcast. So for me, it's kind of baffling that these are graduate students who are just having an emotional reaction to something they haven't read. So this would be an example what I would call postcolonial unreason, because there's some kind of full radicalism at work here, where the assumption is that Freud is colonial, psychoanalysis is colonial, and therefore it's a poison for the body, and therefore it should be avoided.
Mhm.
But you can see it's very metaphorical. It's all about transference, but it's not about critique or engagement. Whereas my approach to decolonial psychoanalysis is that you do have to engage with psychoanalysis and critique it from within, and think about what are the aspects that are universally applicable, what are the aspects that are not, what is problematic, what is true, what is not. Engage with it scientifically. Okay. So because the student did this, the rest of the class identified with the student. There was group identification. And
Wow.
in that moment, I became a villain all of a sudden. So not only did I have to deal with my back pain and that kind of experience, I had to deal with all these projections onto me as a representative of psychoanalysis, something that is evil and colonial and all of that. And mind you, I'm the writer of Decolonial Psychoanalysis, who's like used as a punching bag and receiver of all this transference. So it was extremely confusing. Again, and I didn't want to engage with it as group analysis because I wasn't prepared mentally for that. And I'm against the idea of confusing the educational setting with a clinical setting, because I'm also a practicing analyst. So I'm able to handle difficult emotions, but in a different setting, knowing that this is what it's about. But this kind of thing, to me, it's not authentic. And it goes back to what Jacques Lacan says about affects. He says that affects in general lie. You shouldn't trust affects. They're always deceptive. The only one that you can trust is anxiety. So he has a seminar 10, on Angoisse or anxiety, Angst in German, because anxiety has to do with our state of being. Our state of being, it's a very existentialist argument, is anxiety. So in a way, no one is unique in this way. When I'm going to teach that class, I feel anxiety. All the students feel anxiety as students in the class. If we're honest about it, that's what we should be tapping into, our collective anxiety. And then what do we do with that? But instead of this kind of solidarity in the classroom, following, let's say, Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, you have this us versus them, where I'm automatically the villain, and there's somehow some victims, um, and full radicals. And there are so many details and examples I can get into, but this is exactly what I talk about as wokeism. I find it to be a liberal position. It's not a radical position. So wokeness ultimately comes from the Black radical tradition. It is a leftist position that has to do with anti-racism. It has to do with class struggle, and it has to do with being against sexist oppression. Like if we were to reduce it to those three things, and ultimately against any form of oppression or violence. Okay, uh, wokeness is driven by historical reason. So wokeness is about the use of reason for the sake of liberation. So one of the things people don't read Freire. So where I disagree with a lot of people regarding the understanding of decolonization is when Freire talks about the relationship between the student and the teacher as somehow mirroring oppression in society, the relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed. He's saying that it's not like that. He's saying that it shouldn't be like that. And that the solution to this problem, the solution to the educational setting replicating oppression in society would be dialogue and critique. Okay? So when you have effective politics, there's no dialogue because dialogue is impossible in that situation. Because there's only transference and it's not a clinical setting, so you don't know what to do with it. So it becomes full radical, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like the students feel like they scored some kind of point against me,
Mm-hmm.
but it's at the end of the day, it's a private institution. They pay a lot of money. They think in terms of the student is always right, like the consumer is always right. And when I talk about the genealogy of leftism, as you mentioned, this problems in a way goes back to Marcuse, in my opinion. If I do blame him a little bit because um, this term "new left" is associated with the student movement in the '67 and later on, and to distinguish itself from the old left, which is basically traditional Marxism, where the class struggle was the center um, of basically leftist organizing, because the worker or the proletariat is the side of contradiction, is the side of exploitation. So that's why if you are against exploitation, you take the side of the worker, not because the worker is automatically correct or right. It's not an identity politics. It's not some kind of positionality. It's because the worker is oppressed through exploitation, and that practice is wrong, it's unethical, and that there's a better way of doing it. That there's a way where their labor is not just exploited, but they're maybe co-owners of the means of production, right? And the benefit or the profit is shared among all the workers. There's a shift that happens in intellectual leftism around the 60s where the student becomes the new proletariat. And Marcuse, I have quotes from him in the essay. I like him overall. So again, I'm not the kind of left-right binary thinker where because he did this that I hate him, but I do disagree with him on this point. I don't think that replacing the worker with the student was the correct move, but that was the beginning of identity politics in a way. of thinking that it's about this is like some kind of radical identity that we can use in society, that we should basically rally around students and they should be the leaders. And ultimately, the May 67 movement, and they ultimately failed. I mean, let's be honest. So that kind of approach didn't work, and yet we're not honest about it. And then there's this third turn that I talk about as post-leftism, which basically goes beyond the student and thinking in terms of any kind of minority identity as somehow automatically pure, right? In the sense that it's almost a racist position if you think about it. Let's say just because you're Iranian, therefore you're oppressed and you have some kind of pure position with from your standpoint in the world. But it doesn't matter what you actually think as a human being and what you do. And so, do you see how reductive and, in a sense, idiotic it is? But a lot of our politics today is kind of a politics of performance, performativity, smoke and mirrors, categories and identities, and that kind of thing, and
And cheap tricks.
and and cheap tricks. And that's why when I talk about wokeness, wokeness was related. Uh, so it's thinking about anti-racism as a material praxis.
Mhm,
Okay, that actually overlaps with the class struggle.
mhm, mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, you describe it
Um,
as a dialectical materialist praxis,
yeah,
and it's identified as you identify it as having a broad. It has a broad scope of solidarity, broad international across different uh, intersections. So it's if there are intersections, it is for the purpose of connecting us, not for the purpose of further isolating us and like narrowing down our categories. And I'll be the combination of all the Iranian, I don't know, LGBTQ, whatever, immigrant, whatever.
right.
If I belong to that, I'll be further, like on a very narrow, small branch of a tree, and alone as a consequence, which plays into the hand of the capitalist, consumerist culture.
Absolutely. So it's a reduction to categories, which is very liberal way of divide and conquering.
Hmm.
And that's why I'm against it. It's very anti-humanist. I think it's dehumanizing, in my opinion. So going back to the classroom situation, I argued that Freud was Jewish and that he experienced anti-Semitism in Vienna, and he had to flee to the United Kingdom as a result of the Nazi annexation of Austria. And the students were like, they didn't care. So they just saw him as white European. So again, it's like, come on.
Hmm.
Like if your argument that it's he's white, therefore he's racist, therefore his work is colonial, and I'm telling you, well, technically he was Jewish and he was not seen as white and he was actually experiencing racism. So then what is the problem? But there's no logical argument. But it's because it's about what psychoanalysis feels to me as
Hmm.
opposed to what psychoanalysis is, right? And the only way to know what psychoanalysis is either to experience psychoanalysis or to read about psychoanalysis. There's no way you can just respond to it effectively from a position of ignorance. And I would call that crass ignorance as opposed to learned ignorance, which is a very important distinction that Lacan talks about.
Hmm.
Learned ignorance is a form of knowledge. It's the Socratic form of knowledge of knowing that you don't know. So it's knowing the limits of your knowledge, which has to do with the unconscious ultimately, right? And being curious about that. So in a sense, it's a position of humility. And you have the other side, the crass arrogance side, where you actually don't know, and you don't know that you don't know, and you're acting with confidence and arrogance,
Hmm.
right? And I reject that kind of position.
You have this very interesting dichotomy between two ways of being a hysteric, two ways of hystericizing. Uh,
Hmm.
One is the affective hystericization, and the other one is intellectual hystericization,
Hmm.
which could be connected to critique. And I think that crass ignorance and learned ignorance may be associated with those two hysterical positions.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the hystericization from a psychoanalytic perspective, because I know hysteria has this negative connotation from a feminist perspective, but in psychoanalysis, it actually has a very positive connotation that's related to producing critical knowledge. So, in a way, you can argue that Freud did not invent psychoanalysis, but the first hysteric case study is the one that invented psychoanalysis. So, hysteria is what created psychoanalysis.
Mhm.
And that's what hysteria does. It's a questioning um, that produces new ways of thinking, new fields of knowledge, new methodologies. So that's what I try to do with my work. I try to hystericize by asking questions, by developing new ways of looking at things. But when you say psychoanalysis is poison, you haven't read it and it ends on that. That's what I call effective hystericization, which doesn't lead to anything. And that's why it's a dead end,
Mhm. Mhm. It did end.
right? So
Mhm.
it's a fake form, in my opinion, of hysteria, not a authentic one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think what makes it a dead end, and a dead end that usually when we find ourselves in a dead end, we try to backtrack and get out of the path that led us to the dead end. But what makes this dead end especially dangerous is that it has the superficial features of being a radical. It has the superficial features of being on the side of justice. And so wokeism, it's almost like it's connected to woke. I mean, it resembles the superficially the woke
Right,
position. And but it doesn't go further. It doesn't engage in a dialectical process. Doesn't engage with what else is going on with the world, including what else is going on economically. And it remains like static in that dead end. Uh,
right.
because
Like
it's
simulacra and simulation in a way. You know, I have another example that can help clarify as well. I think I do mention it in the essay. I organized a conference in 2019 on critical psychology praxis, which ended up being that book. And one conference attendee came to me and said, "Hey, do you mind if we just make uh, we just remove all the white people from the theater and just keep it for BIPOC?"
wow.
And I honestly don't like this term, BIPOC. Um, I respect the individuals and the group represented, but I don't like, again, these reductive categories, um, and I don't relate to them. Ultimately, I'm interested in the singularity of each being.
Hmm.
So, so I'm interested in how you experience being Iranian as opposed to some kind of vague Iranian experience. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And your experience of being Iranian will be very unique to yourself. Um, that's what I'm interested in general. And that's kind of the psychoanalytic position, is that you're dealing with every individual case in a singularity. There might be some universal structures related to symptoms and ways of negation, but ultimately, how every person experiences symptoms in a way is there's some uniqueness to it. But going back to the example, if you think about the logic of that person, and this is a person who's wokist, obviously, I was a little bit shocked. Like I'm gonna kick out white conference attendees all of a sudden in the middle of a conference just because you're asking me to do that. Of course, I said no. And when I reflected on it, it's a segregationist logic.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it's couched under a wokist ideology.
Hmm.
And if you think going back to Martin Luther King, someone that I consider one of the founders of wokeness, what was his dream? He had a dream. His dream that we are not judged by the color of our skin, by how we're perceived, by how we're racialized, but by our character. He had a dream of integration.
Hmm.
And yet, look at us today. Do you see how wokeism is a deformation of wokeness? Wokeness is about international solidarity. Wokeness is about anti-racism. Wokeness is about humanism, humanization, liberation, ending all forms of oppression. It's about ending class struggle. It's about feminist liberation, sexual liberation. It's not about being against white people. And the mistake here is confusing white people or white individuals or individuals that identify that they're white or are perceived they're white with whiteness as an ideology. They're not the same thing. We have to be against whiteness as an ideology, as a divisive ideology, as a racist ideology that's behind white supremacy. This doesn't mean that you have to hate white people or that you should hate white people as a default position, as some kind of enlightened position, because you see what it leads to. This idea of like I have to kick out white people from the conference, and I'm against that. So that's the distinction between. Now, the problem with anti-wokeness from the conservative position is that they collapse wokeism with wokeness.
That's right. That's right.
So basically, and that's why it's a reactionary position, because they would be against any form of progress or revolution or liberation, right? And in a sense, it's a phantasmatic um, fantasy about a return to a past that never existed to begin with, right?
Mhm.
As some kind of that. I mean, that was Zizek's analysis of Nazism. Is that this fantasy of an organic whole society, the German society, that's like organically one. But there's this one element that's ruining it.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
know, the Jew, the figure of the Jew, and the figure of the Jew is two things at the same time. It's a very contradictory figure. Um, Compared with like insects and all the worst things in the world, and at the same time extremely powerful and strong and destructive. So an image, a figure that doesn't make sense, but it doesn't make sense because it's a phantasmatic figure in the imagination of these racists,
Mhm.
right? And so this is the conservative reactionary kind of way of looking at the debate, is looking at they're against wokeness and they're against wokeism.
Mhm.
I'm looking at it from a radical position. I think that wokeness is an ethical position, especially as a dialectical materialist praxis. But we have to be very careful about wokeism as a liberal ideology that's especially used by Democrats in the United States and people like them to divide and conquer workers and racialize people,
Mhm.
etc.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. One of the tools that you offer in this, or one of the ways of thinking through these issues is you describe wokeism as a retreat, maybe a postmodern retreat from modernity, which is to say, just like the colleague who wanted all the white people out of the conference,
Mm,
they're rejecting the tools of reason, the tools of maybe
yes,
the means of dialogue and relating to
yes,
each other, and just falling on the images of an image of the white people versus the not white box, and you bring in one of the people that you bring in is Guy Debord and the Society of the Spectacle, and you set Edward Said in contrast to the spectacle idea, and you write that quoting Said, you write, knowing how to use language well, knowing when to intervene in language are two essential features of intellectual action. So not falling into the trap of images. And then you write, in other words, symbolic representation is a radical possibility against the lure of spectacle. So
yeah,
this is something that is increasingly more difficult because the
yeah,
images are getting so effective, and in evoking affect and evoking performance in us, and it kind of making us impotent in the sense of participants in language, and as agents that we can intervene in the symbolic realm. So I find that very interesting. And uh, what is this retreat?
yeah. I think that we have to be weary of the image of the spectacle because that's how fascism wins. So, in my view, um, fascism or nationalism, and this is something that you can see within liberalism as well as within conservatism, um, it works on the basis of group identification, usually with a leader who represents some kind of image. Now, of course, if you think about Hitler as an example, he was called Führer, which means leader. Um, and there's like sort of an imagination regarding this leader, this image that we're like them and they're like us.
Mhm, mhm,
So there's also a metaphorization. Going back to uh, the example of the student that was crying, they used the metaphor of Freud being poisoned. And I mentioned, by the way, to the students because I wanted them to be empathic. I told them about my situation in my body to sort of ground things in the real, the dimension of the Lacanian real, right? The traumatic,
mhm,
that I'm actually barely walking here and yet I'm here. And they were extremely dismissive of that. So I talk about how real suffering is negated and yet metaphorical pain is valued as
mhm,
much more important.
mhm,
And why? Because it's in the realm of group identification. And that's why all the students were able to identify with the metaphorical image of Freud being poisonous or psychoanalysis being poisonous. Um, so imaginary identification is always a politics of sameness, and that's extremely reactionary. So when the class is doing this group identification, they're basically saying that they're one thing. So there's no difference, in other words, and they're one thing against me. So I'm in that case the difference. My argument is that every single person in the class is different, and that that's much more interesting than the position of group identification, and that our politics should be based on that concept. And
mhm,
so one of the big ideas that I'm committed to in my work is this idea of self-representation, which I get from Edward Said as well.
mhm.
In my opinion, we talk about politics of representation in a kind of superficial way. Like, let's say, if you see an Iranian actor in a Hollywood movie, you're like, oh my God, I feel represented, right? I'm against that. What I'm saying is that what's much more interesting is how you, as Davood Gozli, how you represent yourself and how you have difficulty with that because it's very hard to represent yourself.
That's right.
So that's what I'm interested in, this kind of politics of difference and this concept of self-representation.
Mhm,
I'm not interested in this kind of group identification process. I'm not interested in imaginary politics of sameness. And I think these are things that are very detrimental. They are couched, again, why they're dangerous is because they're used by liberals and conservatives in different ways. So I almost see wokeism and anti-wokeness as two sides of the same coin.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely.
Because, yeah, because you have identity politics on both sides, but of different kinds. You have white identity politics, let's say, on the conservative side, and they're against all kinds of, non-white difference or working class difference or whatever. And then the liberals just reduce it to these, again, categories related to identity politics. But what is identity politics? Why I have a problem with it? Because it's a politics of identification. What is politics of identification? It's the idea of the child identifying with their parent or someone and trying to be like them, as opposed to really thinking about how they're different from the parental figure or from their friends. And it's that difference that goes back to the idea about singularity and self-representation,
Mhm,
which again is very alienating position because you realize that you're alone. But in a sense, it's the correct existentialist position.
mhm, mhm. And more truthful. And even like we talked about archives in the beginning of this conversation and finding artifacts from our own pasts from 10 years ago, a piece of writing that we did, and realizing that, oh, I'm a different person now compared
Yeah.
to. So even that representation, even though it could be very accurate at the time, it
right?
was accurate for that time.
Even if there's inconsistency, it still fits within the my point about complexity. Because the inconsistency actually comes from the division of the subject, is that you are an ego and unconscious to begin with. So you are inconsistent by default. So the idea of a consistent position is actually a lie,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? If you would be, that's why I'm kind of committed to coming across as incoherent as opposed to try to simplify how I represent myself to people.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. That makes sense. Well, Robert, before we conclude this conversation, is there anything that you'd like to add that I failed to ask, including maybe touching on your current projects, what you're working on?
Yeah. Yeah, let me tell you what I'm working on.
Sure.
Um, so I have two books that I'm working on right now.
Nice.
I have a book, an edited collection on radical humanism, which is based on conference proceedings from a conference I organized. And then I have another book that's authored, uh, which is going to be the third installment of a trilogy that began with decolonial psychoanalysis, was followed by Freud and Said. And so I'm completing the trilogy with this next book. So
Excellent.
those are the two big ones. I have articles as well that are coming out soon, but those are the big projects that are, coming soon.
Great, great. Looking forward to them very much. And
Thank you.
thanks again for your time for joining me. I really
Of
enjoyed
course.
I enjoyed
Of course.
talking with you.
I hope it was beneficial to your listeners and viewers.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I'm sure. I'm sure. As long as they follow and not don't dismiss in the first 10
And
seconds.
don't skip. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. Let me stop the recording and we can say our goodbye.